Donald Trump is afraid of Megyn Kelly. He has spent months proving that, but he is more afraid of Hillary Clinton, and he's more afraid of Bernie Sanders, and that is why he pulled out of the Fox News debate. He is setting the precedent now of refusing to debate in the general election against a Democrat, but because he knows in a one-on-one debate, which he's never been in, a one-on-one debate against a Democrat, Donald Trump would get wiped out. In the last 2.5-hour debate, Donald Trump spoke a total of 17 minutes, 8 seconds. In a one-on-one debate against a Democrat, Trump would have to speak much, much more than that, at least 45 minutes or more, depending on how long the debate goes. No one knows better than Donald Trump that Donald Trump doesn't know anything, that he is an utter ignoramus on all matters of governing. And the more time he has in a debate, the more time there is to expose that. And no one can do that better than someone who disagrees with his policies. No one can do that better than a Democrat. In the Republican debates, everyone else on the stage agrees with Donald Trump about most policy issues. The game in the Republican debates is to prove you are conservative enough. Donald Trump has no idea how to debate anyone who will attack him for being too conservative. Donald Trump is ducking a debate being run by the network where the highest-rated host openly calls him a friend on his show and where he is the favorite guest of most of the other hosts. Why would that Donald Trump then submit in the general election to questions and debates hosted by neutral networks who are not open friends of Trump and supporters of Trump? Donald Trump doesn't know much, but he knows that someone who's an ignoramus about government cannot debate his way to the presidency. Donald Trump is now playing the long game. Tomorrow night is only the first debate that Donald Trump will refuse to participate in. But his friend of 35 years, Bill O'Reilly, doesn't seem to understand that yet. And so Bill begged Donald tonight to show up at the Fox News debate tomorrow.
I bought you so many vanilla milkshakes you owe me. Will you just consider, I want you to consider, all right? Think about it. Say, look, I might come back. Forgive, go forward, answer the questions, look out for the folks. Just want you to consider it. You owe me milkshakes. I'll take them off the ledger if you consider it.
Well, even though you and I had an agreement that you wouldn't ask me that, which we did, I will therefore forget that you asked me that. But it's up to Fox. It's not up to me, Bill. What they did is they had that agreement. You actually did break the agreement.
You're telling the truth that I said.
Because I told you up front, I said, don't ask me that question because it's an embarrassing question for you. And
but I'm not going to listen to anybody. Right. But I'm not going to listen to any political person tell me don't ask me anything. But you're absolutely an honest man. Then I said, I'll try not to do it, but the milkshake thing just overwhelmed me. But I'm asking you to reconsider it.
A lot of milkshakes.
If you don't want to, it's up to you, and I'll give you a compliment. I don't know any politician under these circumstances that would have come on in here and done what you did tonight.
A few minutes ago, the stakes surrounding the debate drama have escalated a bit. Tonight, pro-Ted Cruz super PACs have offered donations to veterans charities if Donald Trump agrees to debate Ted Cruz, saying, quote, in response to Senator Ted Cruz's challenge of a one-on-one debate, the principal donors of the Keep the Promise 1 and 2 super PACs are offering presidential candidate Donald Trump a truly fantastic deal, pledging to donate $1.5 million to charities committed to helping veterans if Mr. Trump agrees to debate Senator Cruz in Iowa. Joining us now, Jonathan Alter, MSNBC political analyst and columnist for the Daily Beast, and David Frum, senior editor for The Atlantic. Full disclosure, I have never bought either one of these guys a milkshake. Jonathan Alter, if Donald Trump wins in Iowa after skipping this debate, why would he ever debate again?
I think it's a great point. You know, he doesn't want to debate these other Republicans in smaller groups either. Why does he want to go one-on-one with Ted Cruz, who was the top debater in the whole country when he was at Princeton, and we knows his way around a debate, and he won't obviously want to go against Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders in a general election for the reasons that you indicated early on. The question is whether he can get away with it. So the first presidential debate was in 1960, Kennedy versus Nixon. Then in 1964, LBJ was the incumbent and he had such a big lead over Goldwater, he said no debate. 68, Nixon had a big lead over Humphrey. He had done so badly against Kennedy, he said no debates. Same thing in 72 when Nixon ran for re-election. So it wasn't until 76, Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford, that the debate tradition really started. The question is whether, for 40 years later, with everybody assuming there are going to be debates, that Trump can get away with this. I think what we'll have is a long, tiresome debate over debates, and then eventually Trump will be forced to cry uncle and attend them.
David Frum, I just think Donald Trump has been willing to point to the Eisenhower administration for precedents on his policies involving the Mexican border. I don't see him having any problem pointing to those big years where we had no presidential debate whatsoever and saying, look, the country got on just fine without presidential debates.
Well, look, first about the milkshake. This is MSNBC, so I assume what I would get is a kale smoothie. I think, I mean, you're a very astute observer of politics. On this one, I think you are wrong. I mean, you're indulging your way of looking at politics, which is highly literal and highly rationalistic. These debates are not places where candidates line up their policy ideas and micro-detect flaws. This is like a scene from 2001 with the apes and the bones. These are dominance contests. That is what is going on those stages. That is why Donald Trump really did, although he didn't always make sense, he completely crushed Jeb Bush in earlier debates because he dominated him. And right now, Donald Trump is engaged in a dominance contest with what has been, for the past 6 years, the most powerful force in conservative politics, Fox News. And he is breaking them, and he is breaking them publicly, and he is forcing them to submit. So if the question is, who is the strongest force, he's winning that argument. And one of the things I kind of wonder about, if it should happen, and it's hard to imagine, but if it should happen that Donald Trump does win the Republican nomination, he is going to do a very fast pivot to the center. He's got a lot of space to do that. Remember, he used to be more of a gun controller. He used to be more in favor of a national health care service. And what he has just done is punched Fox News in the mouth and gotten away with it. Doesn't that warm the hearts of many independent and Democratic-leaning voters?
Well,
That's Rush Limbaugh's theory.
I strongly doubt it.
Yeah.
But this is one of those great save the video nights, because we're going to find out in the general election if Trump is the nominee, whether he engages in the debates or not, and whether my guess is right or not. And David will be back to discuss that if it happens. But let's listen to what Bill O'Reilly said to Donald Trump about, he tried to teach him a religious lesson to get him to appeal to his religious principles to come and do the debate tomorrow night.
I want people to know you. I've known you 35 years, all right? They don't know you. I know you.
That's right.
You went to church last week. You don't usually go. And you went to church in Iowa.
I do go. I go a lot. What do you mean I don't usually go? I go to church a lot, but I'm not every
Sunday.
Sunday.
You're a religious Protestant. Okay. So in your Christian faith, there is a very significant tenet, and that's the tenet of forgiveness. And I think you should forgive not only journalists who come at you in ways you don't like, but I think you should be the bigger man and say, you know what, I didn't like it, and you should make that case all day long. But I'm not going to take any action against it. You know, don't you think that's the right thing to do?
It probably is.
It probably is, Jonathan. So he, to me, it's all about Monday night. He wins Iowa. His strategy of sitting out the debate is proven. He doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to lift a finger to win New Hampshire at this point, right? And roll on to South Carolina from there.
Right. Well, first of all, we have to just pause for a minute and absorb what we just saw.
Please do.
This is one bully lecturing another bully on the playground about Christian ethics.
And forgiveness. Yeah.
Don't see that every day.
Yeah.
So these are maybe 2 out of the 3, if you include Roger Ailes, 2 out of the 3 biggest bullies in our public life, right there. talking Christian ethics.
Speak to David's dynamic, though, about debates being about dominance. That may be true in the Republican dinosaur debate with all of them up on the stage. But one-on-one, we saw in those debates with Mitt Romney and with President Obama that specifics mattered.
See, I guess where I tend to side a little bit more with David is
you can do that.
Trump,
that's allowed here.
I mean, I think you're right that Trump might do this because he can get away with it. And why take the risk of debates if he doesn't have to? If he's doing well enough in the polls without debates, why debate? He plays the angles.
Right.
But I don't think he's afraid because I think he does see it as an alpha male contest, and he's very, very confident in his ability to master those events. Where you're onto something is that he wouldn't brag quite so much if he wasn't a bundle of insecurities deep inside, right? So at a certain point, we're going to find where that insecurity lies, because the process is relentless in exposing people. So now Trump has been exposed as a demagogue, a buffoon, and a jerk. We'll see whether he's exposed as a coward. I don't think this incident does it yet.
David, quickly before we go, there are psychology teachers now who are using tapes of Trump to teach what narcissistic insecurity looks like.
Look, politicians are narcissists. And if people were completely secure, why would they go into politics in the first place?
There you go.
Who needs this kind of validation? But it's important to understand that he didn't run away from a fight in this case. And I don't say this in a Rush Limbaugh way to build him up. I just understand what happened here. Who is dominating whom? And that's going to be the important question. And even in Trump's absence, if he is indeed absent in the end, that he will be the overwhelming force. He will be more present in that debate by not being there than he would be even if he were there.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Jonathan Alter and David Frum, thank you both for joining me tonight. Really appreciate it.